Hi, John. Hi, everybody.
Good morning. Georgette, I'm yeah, putting you in charge of the waiting room.
Well, I have no video, so you're all lucky today.
I'll say,
Yes,
except I already saw you for several hours,
I
so
know.
it's my limit anyway.
The pain. It's almost 9 o'clock, John. You're getting ready to start
On the dot as always.
at 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock. Okay.
We at
Man,
least have to have the council here. So
there you go. Why did my video work?
there's Mary. That would be our last.
Hmm. Eva, did you see we got the handicap sign up?
You did? No, I didn't see. I'll have to go check it out.
Yes.
Thank you. Exciting.
There's not a lot to see.
Well, I mean, it's a handicap sign, but still.
Yeah.
It's one that we didn't have before.
That's right.
Here. 3,
Why
4.
don't they have a camera?
Missing Chris. What the hell does that happen? Oh, there it is. Okay, good. All righty. Think.
Video's on. I wonder.
All right. Well, since all of the council is here, we got a few things to get started with. We'll call the meeting to order. It's potentially a long meeting. So this is the call to order. I do want to just reiterate that this is a special council meeting called to as an informational session for the council and residents, and also to hear public input on the restoration plan that has been proposed that the council weigh in on. I don't believe we have a motion on the floor yet concerning it. So I've gone to some trouble, not trouble, but taken the time to assemble what I hope will be a definitive collection of information as of now well, it's designed to get as much out there as so that everybody has the same set of fact and understanding of the Meadow, how we got here, and what the proposal worked out with between the Meadow Committee and Parks consists of. And then, of course, there are several presentations by residents, one of which by a group of residents with their view on the proposed restoration plan. And they are in the, I would have put them at the end of the presentations, but at least one of them has a definitive dropout time of noon. So this will ensure that they get in before that. And the last presentation by Tom Land, I've sort of, he requested to present, and I indicated that I thought that was appropriate only because he's going to have 10 minutes, only if it was sort of the approach was to suggest how the restoration plan could be improved. What aspects are, are reasonable, but where more could be done for the good of the Meadow and the town's expectations. So I think his presentation will present his point of view on that. It's just a set of suggestions. Okay, so having said all of that, you see the agenda. You don't see the agenda because I neglected to put it on. There it is, I hope. Doesn't look like it. What happened? Did I get the right one on? This top two. Yeah, are you seeing the agenda? Huh, oddly. Looks like, all right, you should be seeing. No,
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
no, you're seeing the whole desktop. Here's what I wanted. There, much better. Okay, this is the agenda. So I need a motion to well, first of all, a motion to approve the agenda and then any comments from the council on this. So I'm gonna move to introduce and approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
And I'll
Okay.
second if that's needed.
Okay, thank you. I do have one further comment. We did receive a complaint. I received a complaint that the agenda was too long. In my opinion, the level of resident interest in this, the number of comments, the unfortunate interactions and of the last few weeks justify getting out enough information so that there will be few, if any, questions as to how we got where we are and what the restoration plan is all about. This is principally here because it's a council meeting, because the council will likely take action for the council, but of course also for all of our the residents to have heard the whole thing in one place at one time. So yes, it could run long, but not longer than a typical town council meeting, I don't think. All right, anybody else have a comment about the agenda? Right, all in favor of approving the agenda? Okay. Agenda.
Is that all five, John? I mean, six?
Yeah, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we had all six. Hey, Rob. Okay, so let's move right along with the first come the informational presentations, and I'm listed here, but I'm not really going to present anything except to show you that in the meeting materials, I thought it was useful to have available for everyone for a historical listing. It's a one-pager of timeline of the significant events creating the Washington Grove Meadow Conservation Park. Runs from 2000 up to around 2013. Georgette will address many of these with some what was significant for each at many of these points in the transfer of the Meadow property to the town and to the county as parkland. So that's all I'm going to say about that. You can look at this. Anybody can look at this, and we'll have it for the future. So I'm going to stop with that, and then we'll move along to Georgette's presentation, which is on the history of the Meadow, and so I would, Georgette, I will let you take over and
Okay,
get your slides.
I didn't ask in advance. Oh, you've got the slides. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll talk about the history of the Washington Grove Meadow Conservation Park. Slide.
Why isn't it going down? There we go.
It really all began in 2000 when a developer approached the town. He suggested that it would be a great thing if the Grove annexed the Casey property, which he intended to develop, and his development plan was very dense development. The town was alarmed by both the density and by the loss of the open space on our only remaining undeveloped border, so they declined the proposal. In 2001, the mayor and the HPC suggested to planning board staff that the 13-acre field along Ridge Road would qualify for inclusion in the county's legacy open space program based on its historical significance to the town of Washington Grove. There was a lot of community interest and engagement at this point in time, and many in town worked on a Save the Field presentation, which was actually sent to the planning board in September of 2001. Slide. This is a photograph of the meadow during that time period. And it's pretty easy to see that when the Legacy Open Space staff came out to talk to the town and to view the Casey property and the meadow in question, they were pretty impressed by the property itself and the difference it made to Washington Grove. Slide. Okay. This led to the 2002 document when the Legacy Open Space staff sent their recommendation to planning staff, and they recommended that the 13-acre plan be added to the Legacy Open Space functional plan. They said specifically that the Casey property helps define the historic rural setting of the town of Washington Grove. The property, and especially the meadow along Ridge Road, serves as contextual open space for the town by helping convey a sense of historic time and place that would be diminished considerably if the site were developed. Preserving as much as possible of this open space would help maintain the community's unique character. This recommendation was received favorably by planning staff. Slide. Leading us to our next important document, which was the planning staff memo to the planning board in December of 2004 regarding the Casey at Mill Creek subdivision. They recommended addition of the 13-acre open field adjacent to Ridge Road as legacy open space, citing that that was what was recommended by the Legacy Open Space staff. The planning staff noted that the field was determined to provide a valuable buffer to the significant heritage resource that is the town of Washington Grove, and that the entire town has been designated a National Register Historic Site, and the meadow enhances the environmental setting of this heritage resource by maintaining the town's rural character. Slide. This in turn led us to a planning board public hearing for the Casey at Mill Creek preliminary plan. At this hearing, which I'm very happy to say I was able to attend and remember pretty clearly, the mayor, the town's legal counsel, and the chairman of the Historic Preservation all testified both at the hearing and with documentation submitted to it as well. They made a very strong case for the critical need to protect the historic integrity of the town and to do it during phase 1 of the preliminary plan process so that it didn't get lost. Many individual residents of the town testified that day as well. Also members of the Shady Grove and Durwood communities who supported the proposal in their public testimony. Slide. Sorry, slide, John.
Didn't go.
So the document that we have that relates all of this came out in July of 2005 based on a June 23 vote that year by the planning board on the Casey at Mill Creek preliminary. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, go back one. Pardon me. Based on the preliminary plan conditions for Casey at Mill Creek. In the end, the dedication of the 13-acre meadow as LOS was added as a condition of approval for the preliminary plan granted to Oxbridge Development for the Casey at Mill Creek property. They noted the same things that had been noted previously about providing a valuable buffer to the significant heritage resource that is the town of Washington Grove. And it enhances the setting of the town, which is a National Register historic site, by retaining the town's rural character. This became a part of the preliminary plan approval, which is what makes our LOS designation significantly different from other LOS parcels. Next slide. Okay, by December of 2005, the developer still had not moved toward actually starting with the development. And at that time, there were proposals from parks about using the LOS for active recreation, and from the, I believe from the county council, suggesting its use as a school site. That would be from the Fed committee. This prompted the town to initiate condemnation proceedings and led to a truly lengthy legal battle, which I'm not going to go over, but which culminated in October of 2010 when the town purchased the fee simple interest, which is ownership of the land, while MNC PPC has the dedication of easement from 2007 to administer the park as legacy open space with the additional preliminary plan requirements of 2005 of preserving the open field, protect the historic setting of the town. In 2011, Mayor Anderson formed a legacy field committee charged with assembling a draft plan to maintain the meadow and then work with park staff to formulate an operation and use plan. When that started in 2012, right after that started in 2012, I became mayor, and I was concerned when I discovered that Brenda Sandberg, who was representing the Parks Department, tended to talk about the park legacy open space as belonging to the park. So I asked for our town attorney to clarify the situation so that we'd have a better understanding of how to talk to the Parks Department about it. He gave us a lengthy letter with excellent legal counsel in April of 2012 on the town's rights to the meadow, and he reminded us that the legacy open space has a very loose definition and that the town needed to focus on using the 2005 preliminary plan condition, which requires preserving the open field to protect the historic integrity of the town. He also strongly recommended being consistent in calling it Meadow instead of legacy open space. The Legacy Field Committee continued their negotiations with Brenda Sandberg, and this led to the operation and use plan, which was actually presented to the town council in October of 2012 and approved. It was then presented to Parks Senior Management in October of 2013. The field committee wasn't able to get a plan for the tree islands that they had envisioned, but to keep Brenda from proposing removal of all of the existing trees, they suggested compromise wording, which would retain the largest native trees, which were above 4 to 5, which were at or above 4 to 5 feet tall. Slide, please. Okay, this is a view of the meadow in the fall of 2012, at about the time the operations and use plan was approved by the town council. You can see that there are quite a few trees on the meadow, but there's also quite a bit of variation in the size of the trees. Slide. So the mowing began around March of 2014, but rather than leaving any native tree 4 to 5 feet tall or greater, they actually left all of the native trees, including a lot that were smaller than 4 feet. There were subsequent efforts to get Parks Maintenance to remove more of the cedars to create the tree islands that we had envisioned, and this was not terribly successful. I tried talking to Parks Maintenance supervisor both in the last couple of months while I was mayor and during the following 4 years when I was the council liaison to the meadow. The answer was always, we're understaffed, we can't do anything right now. And I could understand that because there were a lot of reports during that time of how routinely the parks budget was being slashed. But what happened was a result of their budgetary considerations and not of our indifference about the matter. Slide. Okay, so that actually pretty well finishes the review of the history of the field, now our Meadow Conservation Park. And I'd like to speak briefly about the current proposal. It's relatively modest, unlike the clear cutting ones proposed by Brenda. It removes only 74 trees in 2 phases, and we were told that there are over 220 trees in the meadow inside the circle path. The 74 cedars proposed for clearing in the center of the meadow is less than 34% of these trees. This still leaves far more trees than was originally proposed by the Legacy Field Committee and approved by the Town Council in 2012. Slide, please. Okay. There's certainly a possibility that rejection of this plan could damage our newly engaged and cooperative relationship with the Parks Department. But what I'm really more concerned about is that if the town demonstrates that they no longer believe that the open meadow is needed to preserve the historic heritage of Washington Grove, that the county could eventually use that as a means of subverting the easement. The town has spent many years asserting the need to preserve the meadow as a buffer because it protects the historic town by evoking the rural agricultural farmland, which has been our eastern boundary since 1890 when the Kent Meeting Association sold it off for farming. If we now say that that's no longer important to us, I believe that would create a serious vulnerability and have very little recourse if Montgomery County decided they needed the area for some other critically important project in the future. There are many projects which would be allowed under the legacy open space designation if the county didn't have to pay attention to that very specific preliminary plan requirement. There are many good reasons to proceed with the proposed meadow restoration plan, but I believe that the long-term protection of the town's eastern border is the most important one. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Georgette. I indicated that we would, between each of these presentations, we'd have some questions for the presenters. I want to limit that to 5 minutes at most and start with the town council if they have any questions. This doesn't preclude questions later on, obviously. But if anybody feels wants Georgette to clarify anything or comment from the council.
Mary.
Good, Mary. Unmute.
Yeah.
Unmute.
I have a couple questions. One, the terminology that's used that you call open field and tree islands that are in quotes, where is that out of? Because I see in the original they talk about just the rural nature, but they're not specific about what that rural nature is, that it has to be open space. So I'm wondering where you're getting that terminology.
Yes. Actually, when I originally put together my presentation, which I was trying to keep as brief as possible, I thought that the chairman of the Legacy Field Committee would be speaking before me, and that would already have been brought up. As it turns out, he's speaking right after me, and he'll go into more detail about what that very first field committee proposed to the town.
Okay. And my other question was, in reading, and I could be wrong, the way that it is the town owns the land, but the county has an easement to maintain it as meadow. Is that so? Any decisions that would be made in terms of what we do with that would have to be jointly decided. That's what I gathered from the lawyer's assessment of.
Well, I'm obviously not a lawyer,
Well,
but
it's in, I
yes,
guess it was in Roberts.
my understanding from what Bill Roberts told us was that the county, under the terms of their easement, was required to maintain the legacy open space as legacy open space, but based on that preliminary plan condition of maintaining the open field to preserve the rural agricultural heritage of the historic town. And he said, to the best of my recollection, that as long as the county was proposing something that maintained the open field, we should be happy and cooperative. But you know, nobody has details of that.
Well,
And his concern was that it might be altered and used for something different.
okay, I don't want to belabor it, but in the lawyer's letter from 2012, he said, and the town, as the property owner, has a right to object to anything beyond the purposes of the easement, and if necessary, to seek court intervention. So that's all I was talking about, and that's all I have to say.
Yes.
Anyone else from the council? Anyone else?
My hand is raised for the first time, and you didn't.
Sorry,
even
oh
notice
my
it.
God, well, I'm not used to
Oh.
seeing that, Peter.
So yeah, just I'm not putting you on the spot, Georgette, but you've mentioned several times that there are, if worst case scenario, the county decides to use the land, what would be just some examples of what they could do there? Besides, I know a school in the park. Is there any other things? Not that
You
they
know,
would be bad.
active recreation like soccer fields or
Mhm.
or anything that relates to schools are the first thing that come to mind.
Yeah.
Know how much trouble they're having over at Jeremiah Park.
Yeah.
They don't have the space for what they need to do there.
Okay. Thanks. That's helpful.
And the population of Montgomery County just keeps growing. That's not going to stop.
Mhm.
But isn't the easement to maintain the rural nature of that meadow to preserve the historic nature of Washington Grove? So I don't know how they could put a school or something else because that's not inconsistent with the easement that's part of the original agreement.
Yes. So our case from the beginning has been that the open field maintains the historic integrity of the town. And my concern was that we not do something that might indicate that an open rural field was no longer something that we thought was that important, i.e., maybe we should just let it go back to forest succession. Forest succession is not an open field.
Or anything that's ordinary legacy open space.
We're
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
We're not having a
Okay, okay.
discussion, we're question and answer. Anybody else?
Betsy,
All right, we're on to Betsy has her hand up. This is the only question. We need to finish the presentations in a timely way, and all questions will then be obviously open for consideration. So go ahead, Betsy.
I just wanted to say, when people talked about the possibility that the school, that it could become a recreation field for the school, I think am I right in thinking that it was, people were saying, yeah, with lighting at night, for games and things like that, we were worried about. Is that true? Do you remember that? They were talking about if they did use that for school recreation, they could build fields that would be lit at night.
true.
Yeah, yeah. I just think that's worth knowing. Oh, okay, that's all.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to Ernie Kawasaki's review of what the Meadow original Legacy Open Field Committee how their interaction went. So Ernie.
Ernie, you're muted.
Not muted.
Yeah.
So, Georgette nicely put, the history of the Legacy Open Space came down to the fact that we own the field, but the park has a easement on it. So Mayor Darrell Anderson realized that we needed to establish a committee to work with Montgomery Park so that we could ensure that the Grove had a good input on how the park was managed and all the other things that go with it. So the committee members were Jim Fletcher, Keith Gillis, Janet Matero, Audrey Mascari, Jolie McCatherine, Greg Silver, David Stopak, myself. What they call a good motley group. Next slide, please. So in April 2011, the field committee first met, and we spent a few months going over and over and over. As usual, there was some controversy, but in the end, we came up with several ideas that seemed okay for most of the people involved. So first of all, was remove all invasive species and maintain ongoing removal. For instance, a mile a minute was starting to take off in the field, and we decided that if we left that to go, it would just take over the whole field. So that was an easy point to make. We needed to develop an agreed maintenance schedule, included periodic mowing to make sure all the non-invasives were removed. And also at that time, the trees were very small or there were no trees. We also wanted to maintain the natural currently existing paths. And we can also include new paths if we wanted to. And we decided the west end of the meadow between Brown Street border path that crosses it to be maintained as a treeless meadow where we could plant wildflowers and things like that. And the tree islands we're talking about, we wanted to have cluster of trees in several places, not spread out, but clusters to help in the way the meadow looked and to encourage wildlife habitat diversity. And where possible, enhance animal habitat and aesthetics with pockets of appropriate wildflowers. Next slide. Okay, if you look at the original 2011, it actually is October field plan draft map, you'll notice that on the left there, the wildflower meadow is a fairly really open space, no trees. And there were supposed to be 3 copse of trees. This middle one here in the center is kind of large. That was controversial, but that's going to change probably. On the hedgerow areas, we had the Parks Department plant trees to make the wooded buffer even bigger. And let's see what else is there. Anyway, as you can see, we wanted wildflower meadows and very few trees within the meadows itself. Next slide. So the committee plan was taken to the Washington Grove Council in October 2011, was accepted. Then we began negotiations with Brenda Sandberg. She was charged with the operation use plan she was in charge of the operation use plan, taking into account our criteria for the meadow. And a draft plan was completed and presented to Washington Grove Town Council in October 8th, 2012. So now we're up to 2012, starting 2011. And we presented it to the senior management October 2013. So you see the years are going by at their headquarters, and I was there, Georgette, Audrey, and Jolie were also present. Next slide. So the final operation and use plan in 2013, finally, vision includes preservation of rural open vistas of the agricultural fields. That part is very important, the rural open vistas of the agricultural fields. The next thing was creation of native meadow habitat to support native species, and we couldn't create a native meadow habitat if there were too many trees. So that was another important point. And provision for resource-based recreational opportunities. That's something the park puts up in all our parks in the county. Next slide. So as Georgette said, Brenda originally proposed clear cutting the meadow. Well, we didn't want that because we wanted a few stands of native trees in the meadow to make it look nicer. Compromise was to leave native trees over 4 to 5 feet tall and to remove others at least annually. The problem was it took so long for the parks to get start mowing and things like that. The trees that were small now grew over larger, and in the end, they didn't mow any of the trees down. So at the end, the original vision open meadow was not achieved because there were just a lot of trees there that were over 4 or 5 feet tall. Next slide. So let's see, where are we? Oh yeah, I'm going to skip forward to 2024. Here we are. The operation use plan is also modified again. Bruce Staggy is set up, is put in charge of the Meadow Committee. And the Parks Department now has a Meadow Management and Restoration Group. Notice it's called Meadow Management and Restoration Group, which is working with us. And this group wasn't around before, so we couldn't work with them. Their plan is designed to return the field to more open meadow-like vista as the town originally intended to be. And that hopefully that was part of our original plan. This will add native flowers as recommended, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll try to bring it closer to the native habitat cited in the original plan. And more importantly, it will preserve the rural open vistas of agricultural fields, and that is also part of the original plan and of the LOS. And we need to keep that, otherwise, as Georgette said, that there may be, if we don't keep the field as a meadow, they may use it for baseball fields, school and things like that. So I think we should move ahead with the meadow restoration plan. And that's where we are right now, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ernie. So questions from the council concerning the original Meadow Committee, the original use plan? Don't see any questions from anyone else. Questions for Ernie? Okay. That brings us to the restoration plan that is before the council. And Bruce Vagey will review why specifically what that plan is designed to achieve and some of the details. So Bruce, you have the floor, and I'll put this up here.
Okay, good morning, everyone. The people serving on the Meadows Committee bring different experience and perspectives to our community work. While we all agree that the meadow restoration is the right thing to do, we have different perspectives on why. And let's all speak very plainly to each other. We're not here on a beautiful autumnal Saturday morning because some volunteers want to remove mile a minute and introduce native wildflowers while others oppose that. We're here because some of us believe there are too many red cedars and that's a problem, and some of us don't. So let's just speak as good neighbors about that. The red cedar issue was raised long ago, as Georgette and Ernie have said, but I raised it again in December in my letter to the mayor and town council. And as a result, town council voted unanimously in January to establish the ad hoc Meadows Committee to try to engage with parks. And the cedars have been a central facet of the restoration discussion ever since. Yeah, you're hearing so far, and we'll hear more about the legal and historic preservation arguments for meadow restoration. And perhaps those are the most important, because if we lose control that we currently have over the meadow, then any steps to preserve the meadow could be futile. But I'm here really just to talk about the ecological reasons for restoring the meadow. And I will also go into our thus far productive and collegial working relationship with parks. Next slide, please. Meadow restoration is among the actions in the Montgomery County Climate Action Plan, seen here. And it's seen as having two primary benefits: greenhouse gas mitigation and climate risk reduction, because of the meadow's ability to hold water. But it also has a number of co-benefits, and one you can see here, very positive effect on environmental stewardship. The county has recognized that it's going to have to spend a considerable amount of money to achieve this action, and it has assigned as the lead to make it happen Montgomery Parks. Next slide, please. The Climate Action Plan states in part that meadows are an essential carbon sink, and goes on to say that they provide habitat for declining species. Ryan has talked about this in our meetings, including the meeting that we all had in the meadow a while ago, that the species that Montgomery County is in most danger of losing are the meadow species. Next slide. There are other groups, other organizations that are advocating for the preservation of meadows around the world, I might say. Fish and Wildlife Service has stated that meadows are important to maintain the diversity of our ecosystems. Next slide. Sustainable Maryland has made meadow restoration one of its key objectives, which is why the committee applied for a grant from Sustainable Maryland to help with this project. That grant application process was inundated, with applications. They had requests for 3 times more money than they had available, and yet we received all that we asked for, the maximum grant of $10,000. So obviously sustainable, and by the way, that was strictly for tree reduction. So Sustainable Maryland was very much in support of what we were proposing. Next slide. Other organizations supporting meadow restoration. Southern Grassland Institute, whose territory includes Maryland, has stated that grassland loss is the single greatest conservation issue currently facing Eastern North American biodiversity. And the Xerces Society, which is concerned about the loss of pollinators, has said that in North America, we're losing 28% of our bumblebee species already at risk of extinction. We've all heard about the monarch butterfly declines and loss of other butterflies that are happening throughout the East and around the world. And they say that while pollinators are only one group of wildlife that frequent urban green spaces, they're a fundamental building block of a healthy environment, providing many benefits. Next slide. Last year, the Sustainability Committee had Doug Tallamy, the professor of entomology at University of Delaware and best-selling author, speak to the Grove about the importance of natives bringing nature home. Next slide. And he made the point that, again, that we're losing key insects, the pollinators that we was just talking about with Xerces, but also the caterpillars, which are essential for most species of birds to rear their young. They transfer more energy from plants to animals than any other plant eaters. One clutch of chickadees, 8,000 caterpillars. So think about the bluebird trail that Ken Shapiro has done such a beautiful job maintaining in the meadows for the last 8 years. Those bluebirds benefit from the meadow flowers, and that's an important part of the ecosystem. Next slide. That brings me to the Meadow Management and Restoration Program at Montgomery Parks. When Town Council agreed to create the ad hoc committee, and I agreed in January to chair it, I honestly didn't know if our work was going to go on for more than a few weeks. The town has not had, as Georgette has said, always a very productive cooperative interaction with Montgomery Parks, and I didn't know if they'd return our phone calls or emails. I didn't know if we would just run into a brick wall. Thought it might be the shortest lived committee in the history of the town. However, clearly times have changed with the county putting meadow restoration in its climate action plan, and in recent years creating this meadow management and restoration program. We've found this group to be a very willing and supportive partner. They clearly love their work. They're very enthusiastic about it. You note in the lower left here, you might be able to read that the park staff contact is named Diana Loescher. So that is the person that we originally reached out to. And when we spoke by phone, I asked, is Parks concerned about the number of red cedars? And she said yes. And in fact, they were generally concerned with the amount of tree cover. And so we asked, can you come out for a meeting? Can we meet with you? Can you talk to us about what you're going to do? And she said yes, she would. But when it came time for the actual meeting, it wasn't Diana, it was her supervisor, Ryan Colleton. And since then, Ryan has been our primary contact. He first came out beginning of April. And next slide, I just want to show you, in brief, how extensive our interaction has been with Parks. I mean, contrasting with what Georgette said before this group existed. So Ryan, who's the vegetation ecologist who is managing meadow restorations for Montgomery Parks, has been out to the meadow for 4 in-person meetings in the meadow with the committee and in some cases with town residents. And he has also attended one Meadows committee meeting. Again, that's all since April, and we were not on their radar in January. He's connected us very importantly with other parks resources. Parks operates in silos, so we needed to know who to talk to get other things done. He's ensured compliance with the forest conservation regulations. He's developed and obtained parks approval for the restoration plan, and he prepared a document for this meeting that's in the folder. He introduced us to Corrine Stevens, who manages the Weed Warrior program. She came out for an in-person meeting in the Meadow and to assess the status of our invasive species and made arrangements for access to training and supervision. That involved introducing us to Sylvia Nunez from the Weed Warrior program, who's been out to the Meadow for 5 in-person meetings with us, including 2 in which she supervised the Weed Warrior events. She also coordinates the training and logging of hours for the volunteers. And finally, through Ryan, we found out who to talk to on the trails team and the maintenance team. Trails team responded very quickly when there was a fallen tree across the path, and the maintenance team at our request came out to assess, replace, and level and bevel the new bollards that you've probably noticed along Ridge Road. Next slide. And this is just an illustration from the couple of Weed Warrior events we've had so far. I didn't get a picture of everybody, but they've been great to do. And if you have the time and the body that will allow you to do it, I encourage everybody interested in the Meadow to get involved and help us with this. Really valuable. Next slide. The experience of working particularly with the Weed Warrior team also made it abundantly clear that Parks asserts its control over park flora. The box on the left is from their website, which reads in part, "To maintain healthy, diverse plant communities, unauthorized planting or plant removal on park property is prohibited." And when we asked Parks in response to a question from a resident about whether we could remove poison ivy in the Meadow, this is from the email response, and I did not add the bolding. It came this way in the email. You do not remove the poison ivy. It's a native, it's important, don't touch it. If it's in a path, it can be mowed, but we cannot eradicate it. And we're here talking about whether or not we can remove or support removal of red cedars. I think it's just important for people to realize ultimately Parks is in control. We can input, but Parks sees this as their land. And the scientists from Parks are not going to enforce that. Brian has made it abundantly clear he doesn't want to get involved in town politics, but maybe we don't want to know if somebody higher up at Parks wants to. Next slide, please. So Georgette shared, this is what it looked like in 2003, completely open. Next slide. This is what it looked like in 2012 with those short cedars that should have been mowed. Next slide. Here's a picture from the same perspective taken yesterday. And you might want to toggle back and forth between those two because it's an immense contrast. You could see all the way down to the houses at the other end. You can only see a few yards into the Meadow now. And those trees, while they are considered mature, they're over 10 years old, they're not done growing. They'll probably on average get to 40 to 50 feet in height, up to 80 feet in height. They're spreading, as Ryan has put in the document that he prepared for this meeting, and as he has said before, they are going to crowd out more of the native meadow wildflowers. They are going to shade them and make it more difficult for them to grow. So from an ecological standpoint, it's not what we want. Next slide. I might also just add, the one thing we can't have is the Meadow exactly like it is now. And if you think back to those 2 slides, there's a lot of change in 12 years. If we do nothing, there's going to continue to be a lot of change, and it's not in the direction of a Meadow. I shared this slide at an earlier Meadows presentation at Town Council. The quote from Francis Smith, who's Natural Resources Planner for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. where he talks about the problem of red cedars, that they are native and they are useful. They do help feed animals, it is true, but they are an aggressive native that can turn a meadow into a monoculture dead zone. And that's why we want to rebalance. We're not taking out all the cedars by any means, but we want to rebalance it so there's room for other truly meadow plants to occupy the space. Next slide. So here's the park's proposal for the two-phase reduction. The orange dots in the middle are phase 1, the yellow dots are phase 2. The focus of phase 1 is opening up the core of the meadow. Phase 2 is a little expansion of that core, but also a softening of the edges, creating more of a natural looking ecotone, as the word that they would use. But if you look, there's still a lot of trees inside the paths, and most of those are cedars. So it's, as Ernie has said, it's not a return to the original vision, but it is creating more of that open space that I think we would all agree is a meadow. The plan is from Parks. The committee did have some input, and one of the pieces of input that we had was the suggestion of doing it in 2 phases, because it gives us a chance to assess the impact, and it also gives us another bite or 2 at the subsequent planting. We didn't want the planting job to be overwhelming, and we thought, well, if it's in 2 phases, it's a more manageable job, and also if the weather is not very cooperative, we get multiple opportunities for the plants to get established. Next slide. So here's a Gantt chart of the meadow restoration plan through December of 2025. You see at the top the tree reduction, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 could happen as soon or shortly after, I suppose, we had approval to go forward. We've already had conversation with Myers and Laws, who would probably be who we would go with to use it. So we have a draft budget and an idea. It would probably take 2 days, not the 2 months that you might be reading here. It would happen over a couple of days. If we do phase 2, we propose that would be around September of October of next year. Once annual mowing happening in early spring. Again, Ryan has spoken to this. He spoke well, he's put it in writing and spoke in the Meadow meeting, that early spring is the least disruptive time to do mowing with respect to wildlife. Also, if you do the mowing in the fall, you're scattering the seeds of the non-natives that you're trying to control. It's not that you never mow in the fall or never do anything different, but this is what he's recommending for our meadow at the state that it's in. We don't have the option of doing controlled burns. They're doing controlled burns at other sites that are further from houses and roads, but they can't do it here. So once annual mowing happening in early spring. The Weed Warrior events, we've again had 2 already. We're trying to get a 3rd one in before the end of the year. I'd like to see at least 3 next year. The restriction for us is Weed Warrior events mean that people who are not certified can participate, but that requires a person who is trained as a Weed Warrior supervisor. And there is only one Weed Warrior supervisor who lives near Washington Grove. So we're trying to get somebody elevated to status of supervisor to make it easier for us to hold events where non-certified people can participate. However, we have a number of Weed Warriors in town already, and a number of people who have raised their hand to say they want to become Weed Warriors. So the training can happen anytime, and people who are trained can do what I'm calling forays and go into the meadow any day of the week, any month of the year, and find a target and start working on the non-native species. The planting events, Ryan has said the first planting event would happen after the spring mowing, and that we could, so it would be 1-day event sometime when the weather looked favorable. He's also indicated there could be a second planting event in the fall. They typically plant up to spring and fall, not summer and winter. And then there would be maintenance requests as needed. The restoration plan in 2026 would look exactly the same, except there's no plan for further tree reduction. So maintenance requests, next slide. Again, we've submitted several, and probably the most visible one to everybody is the bollard replacement. And I want to acknowledge Dave Cosson did a lot of great work for the Meadow when that was his responsibility. He's corresponded on multiple issues and got a lot of things resolved. But one of his frustrations was not getting those bollards replaced. Again, there just wasn't the support, there wasn't the focus from Montgomery Parks at the time. And here it happened relatively quickly, relatively easily. And I think they did a beautiful job of it. Next slide. The restoration as proposed is at zero cost to the town. The committee has no budget. They were just volunteers. The tree reduction would be paid out of the Sustainable Maryland grant, hiring a contractor. And Parks has said if there was any additional need with respect to tree reduction, they would use internal resources. Parks would also continue to supply training and supervision for things like the Weed Warriors, supply the seeds and plants for the planting events for free from their facility at Pope Farm, and perform other maintenance activities, including annual mowing as needed. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we're working with an experienced team. I mean, their Meadow restoration program has been up and running for a few years now. They have 4 meadows listed on their site. A couple of them are really just like demonstration meadows. They're very small. But Rachel Carson Park is big. It's on the same order of magnitude as ours. They've been working in phases on restoration of about 20 acres in total. The latest phase is about 12 acres, so just about exactly the same size as what we're talking about here. They were starting from a worse place, so they have used herbicide and extensively on some of that acreage. And Ryan said in his first meeting with us that he didn't see the need for that kind of taking it back to soil here. We have in terms of the meadow flowers, we are in better shape than the Rachel Carson was when they started. But they're removing some of the same problem species that we have here, like the Japanese stilt grass and the mile a minute. So again, they're experienced. They've been doing this. They know how to do it, and they're getting results there. They've also had planting events there. They've introduced over 45 native species. And now, because the meadow is more diverse, the pollinators have a consistent rotation of food sources as the plants bloom at different times during the year. That also results in a succession of color throughout the growing season, which I think is quite beautiful. You know, we're really heavy in goldenrod. We can make it more balanced than that. Now, it's a little late in the year to go out and see what they've done, with this hot, dry weather we've been having, just as our meadow has gone kind of to its winter colors in the last few days. It's the same thing out there. But I would encourage you to take a look, maybe even now, if you look at the middle part of the meadow there going up the hill, you see a lot of seed pods. Clearly they've been successful in introducing a greater variety of plants, as they say, and as Ryan has said, and that's really good for the birds, and that's something that we can do here. But go look at it next year, because I'm sure it'll be impressive. And I think the last slide, just to summarize the goals for the Washington Grove Conservation Meadow Park, as its full name reads, more open vistas, whether for legal, historic, or ecological reasons, they all align. We want more open vistas. That will help, from my perspective, increasing biodiversity. And I also would say it'll enhance the meadow aesthetics, as I just said about the color transformations. And importantly, I think we want to maintain this cooperative relationship we now have with parks. Again, they love what they do. They're enthusiastic. They've shown high engagement, and let's not mess that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for staying right on time, pretty much. So that's pretty much the fullest explanation of both restoration planning and at least for me, hearing that the parks is in a much more proactive and committed position with respect to Meadows is very important news, considering the lackadaisical approach to the management that went on for the previous 10 years. All right, council, questions for Bruce? No, anybody else? Okay, thank you, Bruce. So the next presentation will be presented by three of our residents who have their own view about the proposed restoration of the meadow, and they're going to explain that to all of us. So I think Deb Savage is starting. Deb?
Yes, John, can you put up our PowerPoint, please?
Yes, of course, I'm doing that as I'm talking at the same time, chewing gum. Right.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Mayor and members of the Town Council for holding this special Town Council meeting. We appreciate the fact that you're here on a Saturday and the opportunity that you're giving us to express our views. Next slide, please.
Oh, this is Deb.
As an overview, I'll first talk about our views. Meadow will talk about the noise. I will then talk about the tree selection, and Barb Lang will conclude with the process and some thoughts on moving forward. Next slide, please. We've heard from several of you and the mayor that because we disagree with the Meadows Committee proposal to remove the 75 cedars, we must want a forest. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Oh, John, come on.
No, I did just what she said. There's 3 slides with we do not want a forest.
Thank you, John. We do not want a forest. We want a meadow. Next slide, please. By all measures, we have a meadow. Parks uses a 25% tree cover threshold as their measurement of what a meadow is, meaning that a meadow can have no more than 25% tree cover. We learned about the 25% tree cover threshold from Ryan Colleton, the park's principal national resource specialist, at the September 18th Meadow Walk and Porch meeting with the Meadows Committee and several town residents. At that meeting, several town residents asked Parks for information about the percentage of tree cover in the meadow, which Ryan said he would be willing to provide. We have since asked for this information several times through the Meadows Committee, as we were instructed to do, but we still have not received it, so we did our own analysis. We took the same satellite photo that Parks used to designate which cedars would be removed and measured the surface area of the tree cover. We were over-inclusive. We included not only tree cover, but also the shadows that the trees made. We then measured the surface area in pixels using 3 different programs. And based on that analysis, the tree cover was 22% using Affinity, 25% using Photoshop, and 24% using Planet Calc, all within the 25% threshold that Parks uses to define a meadow. Next slide, please. As for the cedars themselves, what we know is that the 2013 operation use plan between the parks and the town specifically allowed for them. And with respect to its implementation, the plan's instructions were to keep all existing native shrubs and trees taller than 4 to 5 feet to provide a variety of habitats within the early succession meadow for birds and wildlife, identifying the red cedar as one of those species to retain. Next slide, please. These are pictures from the operation and use plan, and what they show is that most, if not all, cedars at the time of the operation and use plan were taller than 4 or 5 feet. I know we've seen several pictures from 2012. My understanding from Ernie is that the operation and use plan was not presented to, I think, to the planning or to whomever was supposed to be presented. It was not till October of 2013. And I think Ernie said that even by then, most of the cedars were more than 4 or 5 feet tall. Also, we've been told that we should forget about the meadow designation and the operation and use plan and look at original intent. The operation and use plan is the only document that memorializes any agreement between the town and parks about what the property is and how it should be managed. And as Georgette wrote in a letter to the council a few months ago, this plan was hammered out by the committee over many months. Original intent is useful if the language in the document is ambiguous or unclear. As shown in the previous slide, the language that the town's Meadow Committee hammered out over many months is not ambiguous, nor is it unclear. Next slide, please. Marietta?
Sorry, let me unmute. So I just want to quickly stay on this slide for a second and show a recent video. I don't know if you guys can see this. This was in front of Barb Lang's house. This is very consistent, typical situation with the noise.
Marita, I can't really see that. Maybe
Okay. Can
if
you hear
John
it?
stops, no, and maybe if John stops sharing the screen, I don't know. Is anybody else struggling?
Yeah. Where's the?
Marta, we cannot hear it. It's an audio recording.
Yeah,
but we
it's
can't hear
okay.
it.
It's basically, if you were to go and stand on Deb's porch or Barb's porch, Barb's house, it's a deafening roar. And so next slide, please, John. You can share your screen again. So noise from I-200, I think we all know, already has a serious impact on the quality of life for the people on Ridge Road, and to some extent for people further into town. At times, if you're outside in my house, and I know in Barb's house, it's difficult to have a conversation because the noise is so loud. And I think we all agree that as a community, if the needs of our neighbors, even when the issue doesn't affect us, we need to respect the needs of our neighbors. We've certainly felt that way in other issues that have affected people that have not affected us. We have repeatedly heard from advocates of the Meadow Committee plan that the cedars have no impact on sound, because we have raised this issue several times as Ridge Road residents. The idea that these trees have no impact on sound has basically been put forward as a fact, supported by a conversation Bob Boer had with an acoustics expert that the town did engage. But it turns out, after speaking with Bob, he very kindly spoke with us at length, we learned that the study was actually conducted when the ICC was being built, which is, I don't know, what, 13, 14 years ago. And it didn't include any examination of the role the cedars could play in noise buffering. And we have not seen any documentation from the Meadows Committee in their plan that shows that they have looked at this and have any current documentation or any current research on the role it might play. We know that trees do, in general, known to provide buffer. They break up sound and change the behavior of sound waves. In particular, conifers are effective at that. And in this slide, that diagram is from the USDA. So this is, I think, a respectable source. Next slide, please, John. So because there was such an information gap, we went out and did decibel counts around the meadow. We did a lot of them. And we used the downloadable app that was recommended by Bob Boer. And there is a significant difference. If you go to the one side of the circle trail where you're over by the breezeway, where noise from 200 is just directly coming at you, you end up with, as you know, it's a very high decibel rate. It's 57 decibels, although we got different ratings depending on which app we were using. So it really, what's the information that really matters is, do do the trees have the effect in lowering that decibel rate? And in fact, they do. If you go around to the other side of the meadow, inside the circle trail, kind of level with John's house, Peggy's house, you find a 15% lower decibel rate. And if you then go onto Ridge Road, it's roughly the same thing. So the areas where there are trees, there is considerably less noise. I just wanted to address that because we have been told repeatedly that the trees have no noise buffering impact, and obviously they do. We would like moving forward for this aspect to at least be part of the conversation. That's it. Thank you, John.
Okay,
Tree,
Mariah?
tree selection. Next slide, please. John, can you hit the, thank you. This is a cedar tree that was split in half and is growing horizontally and not vertically. Next slide, please. This is another cedar tree that was split several years ago through the weight of the snow on its branches. I happen to know that because I was out there when I heard it split. The tree too is growing horizontally and not vertically. Next slide, please. This is a cedar tree that was planted by the town in the meadow. The tree is thin, it's spindly. None of these trees were selected for removal. Next slide, please. These are cedar trees in the northeast quadrant of the meadow. If you walk the meadow, this quadrant is the most densely packed area of cedars in the meadow. None of these cedars were selected for removal. Next slide, please. This is the Meadow Committee's proposal to remove the 75 cedars in 2 phases. If you look at the top left corner of the rectangle, these are the cedars that I'm referring to. I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but there are close to 50 cedars in this quadrant that are not selected for removal, and I'm only counting the cedars in the meadow proper, that is inside the walkway paths. On the Ridge Road side, these cedars run from in front of the mayor's house down to Peggy Otick's house, and on the Shady Grove crossing side, the development side, about half the width of the meadow. In the minutes of a Meadow Committee's meeting, these cedars were referred to as the phalanx of red cedars along the housing at Shady Grove Crossing that will remain. In minutes of a subsequent Meadows Committee meeting, they explained that this phalanx of red cedars will remain to satisfy those concerned about changes to the views from the houses on Ridge and Brown. In other words, so that certain houses on Brown Street do not have to view certain houses at Shady Grove Crossing, and that so certain houses on Ridge Road could maintain a buffer between them and the meadow. You know, and I get why people may want a buffer between them and the meadow. I'd like a dense buffer too, like this, or any buffer to help mitigate the noise from the ICC. What doesn't make sense to me is the concern about the views from the houses on Brown Street. And it doesn't make sense to me because if you look really closely at that slide, there are already 30 trees on the other side of the path that block the view of Shady Grove Crossing in an area that's been designated, according to the 2013 Operation Use Plan, a reforestation area. In any event, what is apparent is that the Meadows Committee had a role in determining which trees would be selected for removal, and that the views of certain people in town were accommodated when making that selection. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I have to get back down here.
And Barb will talk about the process.
Thanks, Deb. We prepared a timeline that drew largely from documents. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That was drawn largely from documents on the Meadows Committee town webpage, including Meadows Committee meeting minutes. I might reiterate that this whole process began by us going to the parks and not the reverse. Next slide, please. I will try to just sort of highlight a few things. I don't want to be repetitive. January 31st, the ad hoc committee was formed. April 5th, the committee meets with the parks and will decide to identify red cedars for reduction. Next slide, please. On April 18th, the parks will be willing to deal with the unwanted red cedars in the fall of 2024. And June 19th, the parks has called for another meeting to decide which trees are to be removed. Next slide, please. In July, the committee submits an application for a $10,000 grant to pay for a contractor. The parks proposes removing 72 trees, and the committee expects that sufficient trees will remain on the periphery of the meadow to, quote, satisfy those concerned about changes to the views from the houses on Ridge and Brown. Next slide, please. In August, sent the proposal to the town council for the removal of 75 cedars in 2 phases. Then in September, the town residents submit a letter to the town council raising concerns that the proposal is contrary to the operation and use plan, that it will impact wildlife, that it will remove a much needed noise buffer, and further states that the meadow is currently a meadow and that the cedars are not spreading. Next slide, please. On September 18th, the committee, the town residents, and parks, they meet for the Meadow Walk to discuss issues raised by the proposal. The requests and the concerns by residents are not reflected in the committee, excuse me, in the committee's minutes from this meeting. Next slide, please. September 20th, the town residents reiterate a request for information on tree coverage and also the tree's role in mitigating noise from I-200. Parks tagged 75 trees for removal, and several of us were present when Ryan did this. Further in September, the committee accepts the grant. Then in October, 39 town residents submit a letter to the council requesting postponement of the decision to remove all the trees. Rob, at the last town council meeting, you said that this special meeting comes down to values. Whether you value having trees versus not having trees. That's some of it, but I think that's not all of it. In fact, there are other values at issue that are very important to us. The first one being transparency, ensuring a full and fair representation of all of the facts and issues involved so that you as decision makers can make a well-informed decision. At the beginning, the only talking points were about the cedar rust, which impacts apple trees. It was about, of course, the decreased pollinators. It was about the birds of prey being able to perch on the trees, and it was also about the meadowlark never being able to come to our meadow. But Ryan told us that the meadowlark is never going to come here. Any case, but there was never any discussion about the amount of noise. It has tripled, even maybe more, since 2012 and before, obviously. No one ever discussed how were we selecting the trees? Were we cutting more females that carry the blueberry cone? Or what happens after we cut all the trees? What's the plan? How are we getting rid of all the persimmons and the black walnuts that are 5 feet tall out in the field now? So that would be transparency value. The second value is respect, is being considerate of listening to and understanding other viewpoints, even if you disagree or they don't align with your objectives. Residents' concerns have been dismissed. Their input has been devalued. And I personally, I went to one Meadow committee meeting, and when I left, I felt so strongly that the train had already left the station without any input. And the third and last, collaboration. Working together to get to a result that, though it might not be perfect for any one person or group, it will work for everyone. It seems that a small group has come up with a pretty radical plan, but with very little input from those who would be most impacted by the tree removals, such as those of us who live on the field, those of us who use the meadow every day, or however often they use it, but they are actually using the meadow area every day or close to it for walking dogs, for their own pleasure, whatever it might be. There's been more collaboration with the parks, which is wonderful, but I think there should be a lot more collaboration with residents here in town. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we would like a collaborative process.
Next slide, excuse me, next slide, please, John.
Please. We would like a collaborative process between town residents, the committee, and town decision makers to determine, first, how many and which trees should be removed, and the town's long-term goals for the meadow, and how best to be able to achieve them. Thank you, John, the rest of the council, and everyone who is present to listen.
Just done.
All right. Thanks to the three of you for that presentation. Floor is open for questions from the council.
Well, I'll just ask, what are we doing today? Is this a collaborative effort or not? And you're asking what is a collaborative effort? Explain to me what that means. As opposed to everything that's happened over the last year.
I think it's more, as far as I'm concerned, it's more input from residents on perhaps which trees should be selected to come down. And I think, as we pointed out, there are several trees that are just growing awkwardly that, you know, of the proposed trees to be cut, maybe we should consider those trees. I think it is.
No, but what's yeah, I understand, but what's and I mean, what's the process that, in your mind, what's the process to do this? We have a committee that the council appointed, and that's open to the public. And we were kind of hoping that this collaborative process would take place with that committee meeting. But it seems like
yeah, and I understand your concerns, but we didn't know what this proposal. First, I didn't know the Meadows Committee, their intent was to cut down the cedars. And as far as I understood, it was an ad hoc committee. And as far as until more recently, the only proposal that the committee was making was to cut down cedars. Period. Stop. Nothing else. And that proposal was not presented until August. About a month later, I organized the Meadows Walk and the porch meeting. I had a happy hour. There were a lot of views expressed by a lot of town residents. And I think some of the frustration we're having, minutes came out of that meeting, our views were not represented, and including the one ask for information, which Parks said they'd be willing to give us, we still haven't seen. And we've been told we couldn't ask the Parks directly, that we should go through the Meadows Committee. I don't know why we haven't gotten an answer. We haven't heard anything why we haven't gotten the answer, but I think it's just that we feel like that our views at some level are being diminished and maybe not adequately considered. And before this meeting, I think we only had 3 minutes to express our views in front of the town. We appreciate the 10 minutes we've been allowed today. And we appreciate you having this, but I think we just want more participation in the selection of trees. And I'm speaking probably, I can't speak for everybody because I don't know everyone's views. I don't think we're opposed to trees coming down, but it's more input in that selection of which trees should be coming down. And I frankly feel like this is something that we could accomplish over the next few months if the Meadows Committee wants to work with us. I don't know if they're willing to hear from us or work with us on that.
I'd like to throw.
Councils, it's our privilege. So just like the problem I have is the word us. I don't know. We have a committee, which we understand what the committee is. I'm not sure who us is, and then how do we get how do we get this group working together?
Yeah, can I answer that?
I'm done.
Yeah, I understand your confusion. I really do. You're looking at the existing process. It's always worked in town to have committees that advance things and then the council votes on them. The issue is that when we have raised concerns, they haven't been acted on or responded to. And in fact, when we got, the reason that we put together what ended up being a letter with 39 signatures was that repeated outreach to both council members and to the mayor were basically just being dismissed as irrelevant. At which point we decided that we needed to have a little bit more organization in our objections, and we created this letter that had, I think, 2 asks in it again, and 39 people did sign. So when you ask who, that's who. And if you ask what the problem is with the process, that's been the problem.
Oh,
Okay, council, Mary, you
Yeah,
have well, Eva had her question, or if this is on from this, Eva.
Okay, yeah. So I appreciate the information from you all. I do understand that the noise is a big issue. That was one of my first questions. So I appreciate you guys doing a little investigation on that. I guess one question that I have is, and I don't know if anybody has an answer to this, because I am concerned about the pollinators, the butterflies and the bees, and I'm wondering if there's been any research into the if we it sounds like if we go with the parks plan, that's going to be helpful to getting more pollinators, and if we don't follow that plan, is that going to affect the pollinators and the caterpillars and the butterflies and the bees? And I don't know if anybody has information about that.
Put your hand.
Okay, I don't know if you want me to speak to that.
Sure, I'd love.
I mean that's what Ryan is saying. You know, that he wants to introduce a greater variety of wildflowers and not have them shaded. You know, help make it more meadow-like to support the pollinators. Absolutely, that's the intent. If you look at Rachel Carson Park, even this time of year, you have. So,
Yeah, I was just there.
you know,
Yeah.
there are pockets of native trees. There are no red cedars, but there are pockets of native trees, but it's a much more open meadow, right? You go to Glenstone, it's a much more open meadow. You go to Storm King in upstate New York, it's a much more open meadow. So it is about supporting the pollinators and supporting the birds. And I didn't want to talk about it today because it's pretty technical, but we did post in the shared drive a recent paper by Katie Silber. Well, she's the lead author. That's Greg Silber's daughter, who is a PhD ecologist who's been studying meadowbirds. And yes, Ryan did say for obligate meadowbirds, our meadow is too small for some of them. For example, the bob for nesting, he said this. Because they like a bigger meadow, like 100-acre, 80-acre meadow. We're a little smaller than that. But he also said in that meeting, but we can make it a more attractive meadow for them to come in and rest and feed. So it will even help those birds. And Katie's paper, which you're all welcome to read, said the ideal tree coverage of a meadow for a meadow bird is less than 1%. It's not 25%. So we should stop talking about 25% as though it's an ideal. It's not an ideal. I think what Parks is doing is looking at what they could call a meadow and what they could work on as a meadow, and they're taking the broadest possible view of that. But a meadow is an open space.
Okay.
And that's
Thank
what.
you, Bruce. Yeah, so okay,
Thank you.
so my understanding is that when the, if those trees are taken down, they'll be replaced by wildflowers and grasses that would attract the bees and the butterflies and the pollinators.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, yeah, and I think that was my only question. It is helpful to know about the noise. I mean, I think there's a lot of competing issues. There's the noise, it is interesting to hear about the tree selection, and maybe there are some damaged trees that should be considered for removal instead of others. So thank you to everyone.
Okay, I don't know which of you was first, Barbara or Mary. One of you, I know Rob.
Go
was-
ahead, Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for this presentation. I really appreciate the information. I'm just I want to get some clarification on your position. So you say you want it to remain a meadow, but you object to the way the trees have been chosen to be taken down. So like, what is your idea for, are you saying no trees should come down, or like, what is your number that you would feel comfortable with that you think fits into your goals?
We want a conversation about that.
So you have given input to the Meadows Committee and to the Town Council, and you're here today. It sounds like that's not adequate for you this is not considered input, or am I misreading that?
Oh, gosh.
It sounds like a done deal, I have to say, and we would like to have any action to be a process that takes a little bit of time and has a little bit more thought from everybody who might be affected.
So how much more time, and I mean, I don't know. I think the Meadows Committee has looked at your input, and the council has looked at your input. I mean, I just want to be understanding of what you're asking for.
Let's stick to question and answer here, but I understand that what Barbara's saying is a question of how to proceed. But
I
that's
think-
a matter
I
of-
think-
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I think what we like to do is to work with the Meadows Committee and to talk about the trees that our understanding is they've made this proposal. They said this is the park's proposal, and I don't know if they're willing to even compromise on what the proposal is or to engage in a discussion. But I think we would like to participate in discussion for doing that. I think that is something we can do over the next several weeks. And I just don't know what their position is. They keep saying this is the proposal and this is the park's proposal. I don't know if they're even willing to talk to us about it.
All right, Mary?
I would like some clarification on the selection process and what the basis is. We talked about open spaces. So are the trees being selected so that we have a large open meadow space, and that's why the viewscape from the different things is where the trees are coming out? Or are they being selected as percentage? You know, if we're worried about whether Parks is going to help us maintain it as a meadow, kind of making sure that that it meets the definition of a meadow. And I guess I kind of understand the perspective of the tree selection, which is, I don't think, from my understanding, nobody disagrees that they want a meadow, that they want all the objectives that the committee has come together with, but it's how, just kind of a clarification of how you arrive at that and taking into consideration some of these other points in terms of which trees comes down and what is the objective. Is it what it looks like? Is it where they are? What birds are there? I mean, the combination, there are just a lot of questions. And it seems like if you answer that before you start doing everything and have a clearer direction of where it's all going, that, that people might feel more comfortable.
Is that a question for me? Or
Sure.
Is that a question for the committee? So,
I mean, whoever
Yeah.
has an answer
I mean,
to clarify that.
yeah, I think we can certainly have a conversation about tree selection. I think there's a limitation to micromanaging what Parks wants to do, but I think we didn't pick the trees. Nobody on the committee said this tree, not that tree. I will say, just to clarify that about the corner near the other development, that came up from a historic preservation argument, not from anybody on the committee. It actually came from Wendy, who pointed us to the view shed argument. And so we shared the view shed argument in writing I believe, or certainly orally with Ryan in the committee. So in the Meadow, in a meeting in the Meadow. So he was conservative, I think, in terms of blocking the view shed of the development outside of Washington Grove. So that's where that came from. So Ryan said in the Meadow meeting that the first thing to do was to open up the center of the meadow. So he picked the trees on that basis. And I think we can go back to him and say, hey, here's 3 damaged trees. You know, here's 4 damaged trees or whatever. Do you want to take those 2? Do you want to take those instead? We can ask him. He doesn't report to us. You know, he's ultimately going to make a recommendation, or he has made a recommendation to Parks, but we can ask him that. I did raise with him. I did let him know that the less than 25% question was still hanging. We didn't put it in the minutes, and that's true. And I'm sorry if anybody felt offended by that. He said in passing, I could do that. I could go back to my desk and I could do that. He said that. And then the conversation went on. And what we captured, what we thought was the correct sense was we all wanted to walk into the meadow with him and see what trees he was talking about. And we started to do that, and the downpour happened and it stopped. And so that was the last thing. And we said, well, that's what we should do. We should get Ryan to come and tag the trees, phase 1 and phase 2, so people can really see what Parks has proposed. And we asked him if he would do that, and he said he would. But I did let him know again, just a few days ago, people are still asking about the 25%. And I think I've given the best answer I can give to that. I can try to get a more definitive answer from him. Again, he doesn't report to me, but I can take it again. That's where it is. I don't know, Mary, did that answer your question?
Well, let me just show you another diagram that was provided that nobody has put up. And this is, you'll recognize that it's, sorry, I just did the wrong thing. There. So this is the same tree removal 2-phase, but with arrows indicating what removal of those trees does with respect to a view in those directions. So there was method to the selection. I think with regard to this particular goal. Obviously, we could get more information on that, but I did want to just show this. It was my understanding they were not chosen at random. They were chosen for this distinct purpose. All right.
So I have another question. Is there a way that the council
can I go ahead, Mary?
Yeah, Bob, sorry, Rob, are you the one?
Oh, it's Rob.
Yeah. So, I guess this is a question both for, first of all, thank you for the presentation, Deb, Marida, and Barb. And, I'm sure I'll speak on behalf of all the counselors. Like, we want to make sure everyone is feeling empowered and they're able to participate. People can agree to disagree on the process thus far, but I certainly hope at this point everyone feels that their voices are being heard and taken seriously. And in that vein, I'd ask both the Meadow Committee and I'll call it the Deb, Barb, Marida group, can you guys get together over the next 30 days and come up with a compromise plan that you can jointly present to the town council, which I think would be well received? Because it sounds like the agreement really is, or the kind of the disagreement really is about like maybe the number of trees and which trees, and maybe that if that's the case, it's not a fundamental philosophical, kind of diametrically opposed position, right? That's harder to get a compromise. But here it seems like, no one's going to get a full loaf. If we can get a half a loaf or half a trunk or whatever, then I think it would be a lot easier, and I think we all would feel better. No one's going to be fully satisfied, but the outcome will be, more or less or more satisfying to each group. I'd urge that, and I guess that's not a question that I'd present, but more of a, as much a exhortation, I guess.
Can I
And
can I have a little, add a comment in semi-response to that?
yes, and then me.
Yeah, Rob, we've repeatedly suggested that exact thing, that isn't there room for compromise? And we've been repeatedly told that the plan as proposed is already a compromise and there is no room for deviation from that.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, told by
regardless if
who?
that's
Told
yeah,
by who? I need to,
Well,
by who?
John,
well, regardless of whether that's accurately what someone said or not, I certainly am sure that's not true, and I suspect that the council feels that there's got to be room for a compromise and would welcome a compromise jointly presented plan.
that would be fantastic.
may I add something here? That Peter, you asked, what is collaboration? That is collaboration. And I like the thought of being someone reaching out from the committee and inviting those of us specifically. I know that adds something. We could just go to a meeting, but to have a specific meeting, we are invited, or any of us that live on Ridge Road or use this field on a daily basis, we are invited to please come to a Meadows committee. We want to sit down and we're all going to talk about this and throw out some ideas, at least feel like we're being heard by somebody. We really have felt like there's been walls up. This is a done deal. Done deal. So this is wonderful, Rob.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
And Rob, I might add that you sat on Deb's porch and all of a sudden, if you remember, said, oh my God, the noise around here. So
Guys, okay, I think all those points have been made. We're not
John,
engaging a debate on those particular points.
I mean, we can have that debate if we'd like to have that debate. We are a deliberative body.
Well, if you want, then I was fine. The council wants to continue just bantering back and forth, I have no problem. But since my name was invoked as saying that the plan is a compromise, you heard Georgette, you heard Ernie, that the Meadow intent was to have a large area of open space. So for that goal, and you know, nobody's asked directly for fear of getting the answer, I suspect. What would parks do if they didn't hear a word from Washington Grove? I don't know what they would do, but I'm fairly certain that they would remove a great many more trees. That would be my suggestion. And so when a proposal that comes through not to remove the majority of trees, as Georgette pointed out, 1/3, I would call that a compromise. But perhaps no one wants to consider that that's really what the alternative, what a real comparable restoration to the other meadows that the Parks Department is managing, that the proposal here is a compromise. Now, you may say not good enough. I understand that's what the matter is, but I stand by my statement that this is a compromise restoration proposal. Okay, where are we?
So I want to say something.
Here.
I want my name was mentioned also, John. So I want to say something.
It was?
So I agree. I agree. Rob said basically, I think Rob and I both thinking the same thing. I was against this meeting today because this is a meeting where, yes, we're letting everybody air their grievances, but it's not, but we have a divide. And this meeting is just making it worse in a way. But I think we've uncovered the fact that we need to have the Deb group and the woods, like what Rob said, and we need to have the committee get together and hammer out a compromise, because those two groups are much more knowledgeable about this than the council or the mayor is. You're the ones that you've invested a lot of time and effort into this, and it seems like we need you two to get together, and maybe we need to have a referee there or a facilitator to make everybody happy. But I think that would be our next steps.
I tell you what.
I'm nervous that Peter and I are in violent agreement.
Yeah, I am too.
But I offer, I think that's a good idea, and I'm willing to be the referee if both sides are good with that.
I see Eva wants to say something again, and Chris is going to speak up. We have one more presentation by Tom. Perhaps, and it's not going to settle this hash to hear it. And maybe we should hear what Tom has to say and then continue, and then include anybody else with their public appearance statements who have not had a chance. And Bob Doer is also here. It's up to the council. I mean, we can divert the agenda, but I would say let's do Tom and Bob's presentation and then continue this discussion. Obviously, Rob has made a suggestion to the council, and I do have a contribution to that, but I'll save it. Is that all right? Can we go on to Tom's?
This is Barbara. We have two counselors who have their hands up. I think they need to have the floor.
Well, we can do whatever the council chooses. It's
This is a town council meeting. The town councilors have the right to speak.
Well, I was asking a question, Barbara. So if the question is no, we want to speak now, that's the answer. So I think Chris should go first and then Eva second time.
Thank you. And you know, I guess to not to belabor this much longer than it already has been, but you know, what Rob had suggested, you know, I had been putting in emails back and forth between the Meadows Committee and you know, the I guess maybe the for lack of a better term, Deb's group, and you know, and I think communication is essential, and I think that's what we're trying to say, and maybe even a subgroup of both committees is all I wanted to suggest, and that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Eva?
Yeah, my only clarifying question is the essential only difference of opinions between the Meadow group and the other Meadow group the selection of trees? I just want to clarify, like, are they both saying, yes, we are going to cut, you know, I can't remember the exact number, this number of trees in phase 1, and our only disagreement is the selection of which trees to cut? Is that the only thing that is the difference here? Or are there more differences?
I think this is Deb. I mean, I think it's hard for me to speak because it's a broader group that I'm representing. Personally, perhaps the number of trees on the margin, if the proposal is 37, personally, I think on the margins, there might be some disagreement on that precise number, but personally, I think we're near the right number. I cannot speak for everybody, but there might be some disagreement from some people on the number of trees, but I think generally it's the selection is the issue.
Okay, so that's really good news. So that's, you know, I think that sounds like something that could be found a compromise with. Okay, that was my only question. Thank you, John.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. We're not, with the council's agreement, we can go on and have the next presentations. We can skip the presentations. We can do whatever the council feels. I don't want to give the impression I'm railroading the council in any direction.
Keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. I don't want people who have a presentation ready to feel like they're not.
We should get all the information.
We need the presentation
right now. Yeah.
All right. In which case, we are on to Tom Land's presentation, and Tom will have
the agenda has Bob making his presentation.
I'm sorry, Bob. You're absolutely right. I don't know why. It's because of the way the discussion's gone. So apologize. I do. It's Bob's. And of course, naturally, I don't have his. Unfortunately, I seem to have.
Well, while John
Yeah, go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
searches for it, there's a lot that's been said already. Of course, for the significance of the Meadow from an historical standpoint, and the fact that it is in part of the historic district now. But I just wanted to mention how unusual it is for this to actually have happened, for a planned development that a developer had a by right density, the amount of houses to go on it in a residential zone, how we were successful in mitigating that. And there were two reasons. One is, of course, that we are a historic district, and that is the basis for the argument for the protection. The other is that we leveraged an enormous amount of support from a coalition of local and state politicians, from the Montgomery County HPC to the Montgomery Preservations, the Maryland Historic Trust, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, 1,000 Friends of Maryland, and neighboring communities that pitched in with us. There were tons of meetings and even a letter writing campaign by the children of Washington Grove that was presented to the planning board. Legacy Open Space never had used the heritage designation for advancing the site from the Class 3 to the Class 2, which required then the developer to negotiate with planning in the town to mitigate the impacts. There was no intrinsic obligation to dedicate the land, but keeping it open was the only thing that really met the criteria. So in the end, that's what we did. And to usefully negotiate, the town hired an architect to draw up an alternative site plan that showed how to get the number of houses without using the same number of houses without using the meadow, to keep the meadow open. And the developer was satisfied with this and he adopted it. And so then we supported the plan. And the essence of that was, of what was to be protected, was this historic setting, was the sense of an open hayfield bounded by hedgerow. The document forward to 2022, the document that you're seeing here is a document that was prepared by Robinson Associates as a prelude to the update of the nomination. John, if you can go to the next slide, it shows the views. This is the viewshed document that Bruce referred to that was provided to the Parks Department to in their decision process of what views were actually important. And I just want to sort of read one part of it, which is the significance of the relationship to the historic district. The original boundaries of Washington Grove once included a 40-acre farm on the east side of Ridge Road. This farm, which encompassed the land now part of Washington Grove Meadow Conservation Park, was sold in 1890 to Andrew Reagan to help pay off association debt. For decades, this parcel and other agricultural resources on the fringes of Washington Grove defined the rural character and reinforced the idea of the Grove as a place apart, quote unquote. The farm contributed to the Montgomery County's strong agricultural heritage, which influenced the region's settlement and land use patterns well into the 20th century. Today, the park provides a critical buffer between the town and surrounding high-density residential and highway development, and preserves the rural open vistas and spatial organization of the agricultural fields and historically formed the setting of Washington Grove. And this was in anticipation of updating the boundaries of the and thus, in the end, the field is, even though it is not part of the town per se, it is part of the historic district, the meadow. So the sense of the space of the hedgerow containing it are sort of the key to the perception of it being part of the town, the space itself being part of the town. So one of the dangers to the historic district, any historic district, is the gradual erosion of the historic integrity that keeps it on the register. So the support for the original sense of the meadow has been broad and consistent so far. But consistency in our commitments is important to retain both the integrity and of the district and trust in the town's word. But on the other point of the sound, some also related to the historic district in a way is that in our battle with the ICC, sound was one of the principal issues that we were arguing about the impacts of the ICC on the town. And actually the developer of as part of the original development agreement of the Casey property, they were to do a noise abatement study which would map out the sound levels at 60 decibels and 65 decibels that the planned ICC at the time would actually how that would map out on the property and where mitigation might be needed. I don't remember that actually happening, but the town actually hired our own acoustical engineer in this whole process, mostly related to the ICC, to advise us on what the impacts would be to the historic district. And we discussed the impacts of vehicle speed and the noise on various surfaces. And his advice was that it's unlikely the decibel readings would reach actionable levels required for the DOT, Department of Transportation, to construct a sound wall. So there was no sound wall that was going to be constructed to protect the town. He also advised that the effects like sound walls only are feasible adjacent to the source, i.e. the road, and for the direct line of sight noise. And that most of the noise would actually, we would experience would actually be what he called environmental noise, which is dispersed generally through the atmosphere and degrades really only with distance. When asked if we should advocate the thickening of the tree line between the two fields to block the sound, he indicated that adding trees, unfortunately, would not be effective in doing that. So we have not certainly measured in any way measured the effect of what the field is, what the trees and the cedars in the field do now. But his point was that it was really the distance from the source that had the most impact, and he was very skeptical of trees actually providing any assistance.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Questions for Bob? None from the council, anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to our last presentation, which is Tom, and I do have his up here. Go for it.
Thank you very much, John, for giving me a chance. And thank you, everybody else who's made a presentation. And hopefully my proposal ideas actually land in the middle. I would like to see the town develop a detailed plan with the Park Service. I think that it's important to do so to protect the town's long-term interests, and I'll explain why. Next slide. I went back and looked at the minutes of the Meadow Group, Ad Hoc Meadow Committee, and in their first meeting, they came up with this language that's now on the town website for what they wanted to accomplish, and it says very clearly, revisit and or make more specific and prescriptive the objectives stated in the operations and use plan. I would love to see that happen, and I think it would be in the best interest to take the current interest of the Park Service in focusing on our meadow. They are engaged and they want to work with us, and I would like to see a return to developing a detailed plan with as the ad hoc group said, more specific and prescriptive objectives. Next slide. So Bruce and I had back and forth email exchange, and then Ryan actually wrote a plan. He actually submitted it to the town on Thursday. The current proposed 4 actions that are part of this plan don't address all the issues facing the meadow restoration and its future maintenance as a meadow. And I will explain why. The proposed cedars that are slated to be cut were chosen clearly by Ryan Colleton, while he was sitting at his desk looking at an aerial chart. They were not chosen by walking around the meadow to identify unhealthy cedars and cedars with 2 trunks that will, in time, as they grow to 60, 80 feet, will split and fall over. I've walked around the meadow. I am one of those people who walks in the meadow every single day. I can show you where the only purple aster is and has been for the last 5 years. I can tell you that there are only black-eyed Susans in the lower meadow and not in the upper meadow. I can show you where the fireweed shows up each year in the upper meadow and in the lower meadow. There are 2 places. I have walked around, and there are a lot of cedars that have 2 trunks or forked trunks, and they may actually be the same number. We may end up getting to the same 75 number. I don't know, but there are a lot of them. But in Ryan's choosing trees to be cut, red cedars to be cut, he was doing it from the aerial photo. He wasn't walking around, and he has flagged, because there are now orange and red flags on trees, lots that have a single trunk, which we may want to keep and switch out. In addition, when he flagged them, we're walking from on the path from Jones' house down to the path between the 2 meadows, and there are 3 cedars that block the view of the beautiful dogwood in the middle of the meadow. And I said, why wouldn't you take out these 3 cedars so that you could see that beautiful dogwood? It's smack in the middle of the meadow, and leave 3 others. And he said, yeah, we could do that. So he's totally amenable to changing what has been selected and what has not been selected for removal. One of the big concerns I have is that the current restoration and future maintenance plan for maintaining a meadow doesn't address other woody tree species that Barb mentioned proliferating each year, crowding out meadow pollinator species. And I'm going to show you pictures in the next slides. In addition, there's no explicit discussion about using herbicides to address non-native species that the weed warrior pulling events can't manage. In the northern corner in front of John's house, over towards John and Marida's corner of the meadow, there's an enormous amount of wisteria. Wisteria can't be pulled out. It has to be cut and addressed with herbicide. And I will also make the same point about persimmons in the next slides. Are we going to use herbicides in the meadow or are we not? I would like a plan that actually addresses that. The maintenance of the phalanx, as Deb referred to it, of cedars in the northeast corner, the map that John showed with the view from in front of his house makes no sense. Why wouldn't you want a viewscape of the meadow? Why would you leave a bunch of cedars there? I think there's a discussion to be had about which to take out and which not to take out. And since the proposal came from Ryan, let's have that discussion as a town and work with him. This is a perfect opportunity to do that. And finally, and this one is really going to be a hard pill for everybody in town. There are a bunch of large canopy trees, oaks, maples, that Park Service planted at the bottom of the meadow. Bruce and Ryan have made it clear in what they've written and what Bruce presented that shading the meadow will not encourage the pollinator species flora that we want, that will encourage pollinators. The big oak where the path from Jones' house down to the middle of the lower meadow and where the oak path come together is a beautiful oak. I love that oak, but in 100 years, 80 years, it will have an enormous canopy because it's not competing with anything. Its branches will extend like the oak along in Woodward Park. Those branches of those oaks in Woodward Park actually extend 100 feet from the trunk. That's a lot of shade. Do we take out that tree? Do we use part of the grant funding to actually spade the tree now, if it's possible, and move it somewhere where it would benefit the town? Peggy and Bob are the great beneficiaries of a beautiful, huge Japanese maple that was spaded from the Kershaw's house and moved to their property. You can spade big trees and move them. I wonder whether we should do that with some of the big canopy trees put at the lower meadow. Next slide. So those circled trees are predominantly black locust, and the yellow ones are persimmons. There are other sweet gums, autumn olives, and black walnuts that are starting to crowd out the pollinator species in our meadow. They have proliferated year by year. Though that growth that you see in this photo happened in 1 year after the mowing of the meadow. It is crowding out what we want, and we have to deal with that if we want it to look like a meadow into the future. Next slide. All the circles are around very beautiful purple leafed sweet gum. They really have proliferated throughout the meadow, and the plan that we are looking at does not address this in any way. In talking to Ryan about it, he said if we mowed twice a year, the sweet gum, the black locust, the black walnut, and the autumn olive would be exhausted. Next slide. These are, in the left one, they're black locusts down by the tree line. In the photo on the right, you have black walnuts. Notice that they are all taller than the meadow species that we are trying to encourage. They are crowding out what we want. We need to have something in a plan that will address this. Next slide. Bruce's presentation talked about 1 mowing per year, according to his working with Ryan. If we want to deal with the black locust, black walnut, autumn olive, everything other than the persimmon, he suggested 2 mowings a year. If you go to Rachel Carson right now, the larger portion of it, the 2/3 portion farthest away from the parking lot, they have mowed to maybe 1 inch, 2 inches high, already done in October. My guess is they did that to actually deal with the incursion of these woody species. This photo is of a huge patch of persimmon. The persimmons have grown in 1 year to 7 to 8 feet tall, and the patch is probably 10 by 10. There are many persimmons throughout the meadow. The only way, Ryan said, to deal with the persimmon is to actually cut and use herbicide. So do we? Do we not? Do we want the persimmon to take over the meadow, which it will do through time unless we have a long-term plan? We're talking about restoring the meadow. I think we need to actually have a longer term vision. I shared a photo of a very, very healthy, tall cedar next to Greg Silber's house. I encourage everybody to go see his 2 very large, tall cedars to see what the future of red cedars in the meadow will look like. Next slide, please. So my request is that we actually work together to develop a detailed meadow restoration and management plan with Park Service. I think that it will be in the best interest of the town over the long term. The Park Service right now seems very interested in restoration, and we can take advantage of that to develop a more comprehensive, detailed plan for restoration and maintenance into the future. I don't think, as Georgette's presentation, Bob's presentation, Ernie's presentation all made clear, I don't think we can count on the Park Service having continued interest in the meadow and its management through time into the future due to personnel changes and budgets shrinking and priorities shifting. I think we need something in writing that's more comprehensive and more detailed so that we can point to it as an agreement. I think the town residents deserve a more detailed plan than even what Ryan submitted on Thursday. Thank you. Let me add one more thing. I am very happy and willing to work with the people on the Meadow Committee and everybody else who's made a presentation and has a view on this to actually work with Ryan constructively to actually come up with a detailed plan.
All right, we're on to questions now regarding Tom's proposal. Betsy, first the council, and then Betsy. Anybody on the council? All right, Betsy, you're on.
Okay, I wanted to point out that back when when the county they mowed much more than people thought, and they took out what they took out mainly in that meadow was a really beautiful stand, quite a good number of persimmons that were old persimmons, and they are native persimmons, not the ones that you're going to buy in a nursery or anything. They are native persimmons, and they were very mature. I used to harvest from those persimmons, and it was a real gift that we had. And what the county took out when they mowed, or when they put in a chewer upper thing, they chewed up all the persimmons. And they didn't take out what I call junipers. They are junipers, the red cedars. They didn't take out the red cedars, and the explanation was they were too hard to get into. They were chewer uppers, didn't deal with that very well. So they cut these incredibly valuable, in my opinion, persimmons. I don't think the foregoing that people should be trying to suppress any persimmons that persist. That was part of that field, and it's native persimmons, and they've been there for those were not young trees at all. They were very, very mature and twisty. They didn't do very much shading, and that's all I wanted to say.
So no question. Any questions here?
Yeah, I have a question for Bruce. Given what Tom suggested, and you've been working with Ryan in Parks, and he seems, at least, I mean, I wasn't at the meetings, but from what you said, seems to be pretty amenable to discussing with us how to go forward. How do you feel like if we came to him or tried to, be a little bit more prescriptive in what our plan was, since we've got such good relationship with them now? How do you think that would?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not disagreeing with
Right.
the view, which is we really want to restore this meadow, but I think it makes a whole lot of sense, as Tom said, to do it, in a more overall viewpoint, instead of just kind of jumping in and then doing it, and also relying on them, as to what the next stages are, because it seemed kind of, not so specific. Anyway, that's my question.
Okay, sure. First, Tom, thank you you made some really good, thoughtful comments, and I appreciate the attitude that you're bringing to it, and the time you spend in the Meadow to take a look at it. So thank you for that. The I think Ryan is amenable. I did say in an earlier town council meeting, I'm trying to get this in writing. You might remember I said that. It's also in the notes from of the Meadow files that Dave Cosson has collected over the years, that Parks does not do O and UPs anymore. So I'm not sure exactly what the detailed plan would look like that would come out of it, but I do want to get it in writing, and that's why I was encouraged to see what Ryan submitted this time, and how I distilled that into the Gantt chart that I presented. I think Tom is correct that there are other woody species there. Ryan mentioned in the meeting that we had in the Meadow that, well, we can manage those as woody shrubs if we mow every year. And that is one way to do it. The other way to do it is what Tom is suggesting, either more frequent mowing, which has its downside, or the use of herbicide. And my understanding, and correct me if anybody knows this is wrong, the parks has periodically come into that meadow and used herbicide on things like milaminin, right? Okay, Tom is nodding yes. So, parks will do what.
And Johnson's grass.
Yeah, okay. So parks will do that, just like the contractor for the Woods Committee, comes in sometimes and uses herbicide if they feel that it's necessary to do. And I think we can have that conversation with Ryan. All I can tell you is, in all the conversations that the committee has had with him so far, he's said, no, I don't think we'll need to do that. But it was a, no, I don't think we'll need to do that, not a, no, we will not do that. And it's what I was saying before. This is a living thing. The Meadow's a living thing. And it's like you're a doctor with a patient. You can't have a 20-year plan for a patient, but you can have a plan that looks a bit to the future, and then you're going to reassess, you're going to have them come back in, you're going to do some more testing, you're going to make some changes. And that's what this is. And that's why the committee has only voted on phase one. We did not vote on phase one and phase two. We did not recommend, let's approve everything. We said, here's the baby step, together with the Weed Warrior events, together with the planting events and other maintenance items that'll get us started in the right direction. But I agree with Tom. It's not a complete picture in that sense. I would just caution us all to realize that with a living system like this, you can't be totally prescriptive. And I think Ryan, yes, I think he would be very open to our questions. There is actually a note in the old Meadow files from Dave Cosson, where he captured that the Parks was concerned about the black locust. And that was also echoed in a statement that Diana Loescher made to me in a phone call. So they are aware that there are other woody species, and and she said, we're keeping an eye on that. So yes, it is a dialogue, and it is going to be interactive. And I think that would be great if we could go together in that spirit. And I'm more than happy to talk to Ryan about any damaged trees. Additional damaged trees, yes, we can do that. Absolutely. But again, unless the information in Dave's files is wrong, they don't do O and UPs, so I don't know exactly what the document will look like.
Well, there are other ways to create a cooperative plan moving forward. It doesn't have to be an OUP, and there are other ways to address how successful it is and add steps and remove them, such as an annual report on how the Meadow is doing and where it is deficient and where it's successful. We don't get that sort of thing. So, I mean, let's not discount that there are other ways of maintaining cooperation and ensuring that the experts continually are really looking at how things are going. So, All right, we've heard a lot of stuff. Mary, you have a question?
I just have one more question in terms of going back to the meadow. We own it, and the parks is supposed to maintain it based on the easement that they got to maintain it as a rural area. And they can't do anything without we have to do it collaboratively. So it seems to me that, I mean, no, that's not true.
No, and just for the council's information, Rob suggested that it might be useful to consult our town attorney for a review for the council as to where the legal responsibilities lie, based on all the existing documentation. She was not there during any of this process that Georgette, for example, reviewed. So she has to look at all the documents and compare and advise us. And it's would perhaps appropriate that a decade or more has gone by and we can get that. So yeah, I don't want to. I'll offer my understanding, and it's stark. The facts are that they manage it according to the legacy open space prescription for this historic resource piece of property in its connection with Washington Grove. The extent to which that would incorporate the wants of the town is not described anywhere. My take on it is that in general, as we've seen with Ryan, but he wisely, he's not a decision maker, is that they wouldn't want to create controversy between parks and the town. And currently that certainly is the case. Whether that would continue in the future, but if push came to shove, they can literally do what they want. If their idea is to make a meadow and the town's idea is this sort of meadow and their idea is that sort of meadow, if they were to ignore the relations with the town, they could do it. There's no legal authority for the town to interfere with that.
So, John,
but it has to be
hold on,
rural.
That's my opinion.
Hold on. I understand, John. I don't think that is not. I don't think that we should present it. I'm not saying you were, but I don't think we should present it as the official town's position, because ultimately we may conclude that's different. Frankly, I don't, based on reading Bill Roberts' letter, which is in the materials, I'm not sure that I fully agree with that characterization that they can do whatever they want. I tend to disagree. We own the property. All they have is an easement. I think it would behoove the town to get Sue Ellen's input on a legally privileged basis. I don't want us making public record admissions against the town's interests about the lack of control we have. So I'll just leave it at that.
I preface this, that this is based on more than Bill Roberts' letter, that this is the status of our interest in the field. We have substantial rights to any proposed change in the use. That's why we bought the property. We have limited rights, and my assertion is they're very limited in requiring that the terms of the easement go in this direction rather than that direction. That's all I'm saying. And I know you'll be more comfortable, Rob, if you hear it from the town attorney. I don't think we should operate like we're either telling parks what to do, or what we want to do, as you've heard repeatedly here, is we want to have all of the actions that go on there be cooperative and demonstrate agreement that we're good with doing that, and they will in turn take into account our preferences in that process. So this is one of those situations where falling back on your legal rights, I'm just saying, will be damaging to the town. My opinion. All right, let's hear from anyone else as a public appearance if the council's will. People here haven't spoken. If we have anyone who wants to add anything to this conversation.
Deborah.
Yes.
Deborah.
Hi.
Oh yes, Deborah, you've been sitting there. I apologize. It's been there so long. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And I'm a town resident. I live along Ridge Road, but not right in front of the, my viewscape is not in front of the meadow. And I'm very thankful that everybody that all the presentations have been in support of maintaining the meadow. I had a couple of questions. One question was in terms of the tree selection. Are they selecting the trees based on the groupings of trees? So that we're trying to get rid of certain groups of trees? Because it sounds like if we're saying, well, we don't like this tree over here, but can we just spread it out? So is it the number or the grouping of trees is one question that I have. And I just also want to say again, you know, how important I think the meadow is for the town because it gives us a totally new ecosystem. And that, you know, we're able to support the pollinators, which I think is, you know, is almost our civic duty at this point. But also the other question that I have, so I have a question about the grouping of trees, is that we're trying to take out different groups of trees so that there's large clumps that are gone, or is it really the number of trees that we're interested in? And then the other question I have is, how does a person join the ad hoc meadow committee? So that would be another question I would have because I would, you know, because it seems like there's been this tension between some of the residents on Ridge Road and the committee, but was there not a possibility for just joining the committee to have more input? And those are my two questions. And just to thank everybody for all this work you've done. And I've certainly appreciated and learned so much today.
Shall I answer that?
Yes. Go ahead.
So yeah, so Deborah, thank you for your comment. First, yes, others can join the committee where our schedule is posted in the bulletin, and I get a reminder out on the listserv when my brain is functioning anyway. So yes, we would welcome other people to join the committee. The tree selection process, as Ryan described it in the document he submitted for this meeting, was the first phase, again, primarily opening up the middle of the meadow. And then, yeah, so there are some groups of trees, but it's you know, to John's point, creating some more open view shed. And then the second phase was more about creating a natural edge to that open space. So that's I don't know if I can add anything more to that. That's basically what it was.
Okay.
Could I make one comment? Because
Paul, Bruce,
okay.
Plenty of comments to be made.
Okay.
I'm sure, but I saw Paula indicate she would like to speak. So
sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Timing everything carefully, as you can see. But.
Yes, thank you. Good training, John. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I think that the presentation was excellent. And from what I'm hearing, it seems like there are really just mainly 2 points of contention, and that is which cedars should be cut and with more resident input, and then consideration for other species in terms of a longer term, more detailed plan. Having said that, I'm really want to make sure that the momentum right now that the current Meadows Committee has started is maintained in terms of the relationship between park and planning and the town, and in terms of not stalling actions to interrupt the rapid succession that's occurring in the meadow. So I'm just concerned about adding a lot of bureaucracy in between that could really make any action a lot less effective if we don't do something quickly. So I'm proposing that
there can be add just another phase, that we go on and follow the suggestion of the Meadows Committee, but with another walk around before trees are removed by the concerned residents and Ryan and the Meadow Committee, just in terms of the selection of trees that will be cut. And then after phase 2, to just have some very simple written agreement that the Parks and Planning will meet again to talk about the other issues that Tom brought up in terms of the other species and some ideas about longer term planning, or just regular meetings with them to discuss those specified issues. So I'm just concerned about losing this momentum if there's a lot of time lost in between. So anyway, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Anybody else?
John, I'd like to speak, but I can't find the function for the hand.
Well, then you can't speak.
Well, I might anyway. Until you
All
cut me
right.
off. I just have a couple things. One of them is that I'm having trouble understanding the core purpose from the ad hoc committee. When I first started talking with them, it was kind of like, if we don't cut all these trees down, we'll have a forest, which really made absolutely no sense to me. And then we talked about the definition of a meadow, because that's what we were told they wanted. And from Ryan, we learned that 25% tree coverage is how they would define a meadow. And now today, Bruce has told us, well, there's actually the specific kind of bird that he thinks we should be accommodating. It's an example of how hard it is to work with a committee that's kind of changing the goalpost. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the noise. I don't really care what the highway department says about noise. I can tell the difference with my own ears. I think that they talk about noise at a much higher level than we're talking about noise. I think they get concerned over regulatory requirements when they might have to build a wall. I'm talking about the noise that changes the historic nature of our town from a rural community to a community where you're hearing motorcycles and cars racing down the highway. And to anything we can do to reduce that would make a lot of people, I'm speaking for the people I've talked to on Ridge Road, happier. So those are my 2 points.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Last call. All right, well, let's see. Thanks, everybody. Let's get back to the agenda, which has nothing after public appearances, but we've had some suggestions both from the people expressing their views and from council members that the groups of residents and the Meadow Committee get together to come to some compromise position, or at least a jointly agreed position. I did have a comment on that for the council. It would be, we would get more effective advice. I think if the council were to see fit to offer some guidance with respect to this matter. And I'm not suggesting we do it today. We have a council meeting coming up on Monday, the 11th, and right now it's not heavily, and the agenda I don't see is terribly full, but that always changes right up to the meeting. But at that meeting, after some thought by the council, that the kind of guidance that might be provided could be proposed. And I can express what the kind of guidance I think is really necessary here in order to guide what what does restoration mean, and what sort of meadow is does the town support. And I think that can be summed up fairly cogently, without being too restrictive. I mean, I would propose it might be summed up cogently. So we either re-emphasize, the council can re-emphasize that the original rationale for maintaining the field, it's still a field, it's just also a meadow. The original rationale for the field, we're fully committed to. And what does that mean? You've heard numerous times. It's in the record throughout, the historic record. It's also in, as Bob pointed out, it's in our National Registry application, and successful application. And that is that our connection to our rural heritage, and a rural, and that is agricultural land, and a treed field, the extent to which a treed field meets that requirement needs to be assessed. That's the top point. The second point is, then we all agree that it should be a meadow. And the question is a 25% tree covered a meadow? This is now the ecological argument. Can the council give some guidance as to what sort of, what would we be restoring towards? We're not actually restoring anything. If we're restoring it back to 2012, or we're restoring it back to 2005. But if we're developing or promoting a meadow, what sort of meadow is that? And that's a top, I mean, all discussions of trees and invasive and these species and that species, I believe, I think should be decided with these several umbrella goals in mind. That might be the viewscapes, and it might be we want to promote pollinators and meadow habitat, and we want to maximize that. Or maybe we don't want to maximize that. We want to, whatever. So if with that sort of thing, you can make all of these, I think then it becomes possible to actually, have a discussion about deciding about the specifics of the plan. But without it, that's where this, I think, I'm still hearing a discrepancy in viewpoints. The noise argument. If you believe that argument is important, then one of the guidances would be, the maintenance of the meadow, or the restoration or the promotion of the meadow should maximize noise reduction, or not. Okay, so that's my recommendation, that everybody be absolutely talk about. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how much knowledgeability there is, within the town. People who have spoken, lots of people who haven't spoken, and we know how many people care and know a lot about this, and have been willing to work as weed warriors or work on this whole idea. And we're going to want to have that going into the future, whatever direction we take. But I hope the council will consider giving some guidance, because I feel without that guidance, we will continue to have some differences. There won't be a a way to resolve some differences of opinion.
So John, there's two directions. One direction is the one that Rob presented, which I agree with, is collaboration between these three groups. As Mary and Eva both pointed out, there's not a lot difference going on here. And instead of being antagonistic towards each other, I think this meeting has been a great meeting to get us all together and to understand that we're not that far apart. We all have similar goals. Whereas if we're going to have the council giving guidance on this, is that going to work? And is that the best way to proceed? I'm just asking this question because it seems like it'd be much better to have the people who are most knowledgeable about this collaborate together and come up with a solution. And at the same time, I totally agree that we need to have a definitive answer on what we can and can't do with the Meadow. I think that would be helpful for everybody also, because that's always lurking there in the background.
Yeah, I agree with Peter. Again, I'm getting very nervous. But I'm not sure that I can give or even want to give, kind of prescriptions on what the group should do, other than there's going to be some compromise. It seems that as much of the kind of I don't know, I use the word antagonism, but sort of agitus, as was the lack of kind of what people, various people perceived as like not being part of the process, or the process being unfair. So we're remedying that, and the way to remedy that is, essentially, I mean, I don't know if everyone who has been interested, I'll call it the kind of Deb, Marida, Barb group, really kind of group of interested neighbors, join the committee and work out a compromise. I mean, y'all can be part of the committee. I'm sure Bruce is fine with that. It sounds like he said it's open to anyone. It's not one of these committees that has restrictions, and that's fine and good. So, but even if you don't formally join, come up with a compromise plan. Again, if the disagreement really is sort of number and which trees, informed by some of the observations about everything from which trees are healthy, the kind of split trunk or problematic trunk trees that Tom was talking about. That sounds like an important consideration. View sheds and noise blocking considerations. Those all sound reasonable. And Ryan Colleton sounds like he struck me as a perfectly reasonable and pleasant guy. He doesn't seem to be pushing any kind of agenda. So elicit his views to the extent he has any on all these considerations, and then hopefully come back to us, probably not the next meeting, but maybe the December meeting, with a proposal. I mean, if you can get something done by the November meeting, even better, but that's rushing it a little bit. That's my view.
I do agree somewhat with John about having some idea of what we want it to be, because it's different I mean, rural is kind of a general idea. A lot of things can go under that. And is it open space, or is it just a meadow that is functioning for all the reasons that we say? So I think a little bit of clarification of that, maybe when the group gets together, would be helpful in terms of making these decisions. Because it's very different if you want to make it look like agriculture and be a field versus be a productive, vibrant meadow that has a combination of different things.
I mean, I'll personally, all I think is it should stay a meadow, and arguably has to stay a meadow. And meadow seems to be a relatively flexible, but not completely indefinite concept. I don't think it can be like a fully grown in woods like the West Woods or the East Woods. I don't think we're talking about that. I don't think that would be a meadow. I don't think we should clear cut it either. I don't think meadow requires it to be clear cut. And I don't think that I don't think anyone is advocating clear cutting. But beyond that, I don't really have I mean, I personally, I'm not speaking for the council. I don't have any other particular preferences, and kind of again defer to the people who've studied this and the people who are most impacted, which are the the neighbors living directly on Ridge Road and the Brown Street cul-de-sac, et cetera.
This is Barbara. There has been tons of information conveyed at this meeting and prior to this meeting. And I think the committee and Deb and Barb and Marida, they have all that information and they have the feel of what we're trying to do here. They know the tone of where we want to go with this. And I trust that they will get together and hammer out something that will be amenable to the most number of people. I think that there is far more from what I've heard, I think there's far more agreement on the people who have spoken today than there is disagreement. So if you can resolve those small areas of disagreement, then I think that's a really good path forward.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out how to use this hand gesture thing to put up my hand, but so I guess we're kind of, to me, it sounds like we're going around in circles because, as Barbara just mentioned, it sounds like there's a lot of, agreement, something needs to be done with the Meadow. So I guess, if I may just continue on with what Rob was saying and Peter and everybody else is, we should get together. I've been trying to get folks together, but maybe this meeting will be a good impetus to set up a schedule. Maybe that's what we ought to do now, is to just, when can the groups meet, and let's set a date, let's set a time and move forward. And this kind of goes along with what Paula had to say. Let's not lose the momentum. There's money in the bank that the committee was able to successfully get. It's amazing. And we don't want to run that out. At some point there's going to be an expiration date on those funds, I'm sure. Yeah, so that's my suggestion, is let's try to set a date if we can, even now, before we hang up. Thank you.
All right. Well, if everyone feels that this is a good place to leave it, we can have a motion to adjourn. We'll create some minutes for this, which I just want to propose. Any minutes for this meeting will just be a kind of a recitation of who spoke, or what, and a reference to what the subject was. I think there were a lot of give and take and views expressed. The recording, we've all agreed, is part of the minutes, so we don't need to try and write down the various and sundry aspects. So the minutes you'll see be relatively spare, but will include, of course, the recording for anyone who wants to actually review the full discussion. I hope that makes sense. You'll get to weigh in on it, obviously, when the minutes come up for approval. Bob, one more thing.
May I suggest maybe the next Meadow Committee meeting might be a good time to get together?
Can you let us know what is the date of that meeting? Because some of us have not been able to make the meetings because of conflicts. What date is that, Bob?
It's the third. It's usually the third Wednesday. It will be the third Wednesday this month, whatever that day is.
Okay. Can you give us a date?
A bulletin.
The bulletin. The 20th.
Wednesday is the 20th.
The 20th. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Are there any objections to adjournment? All right, guys, we made it under.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
Excellent. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Excellent meeting.
Thank you for organizing it.
Excellent.